Thank you for joining us today to talk about sustainable differentiation for the general education classroom. What challenges are we trying to solve here? We really know there's many of them, but three we've narrowed it down to. One, we know students are having a challenge accessing grade level standards. We know students have significant gaps in foundational skills for academics, especially even some social emotional skills. We also run out of time to plan for all the different needs the students have in our classroom. And we really need some more tools that we can pull out and implement in our classroom to meet the needs of all the students. So our question we have is, how are we going to overcome this challenge? Like, how are we going to equip diverse learners to climb this mountain and meet the rigor of grade level work? So we're going to walk you through a process you can replicate in your own context to get students ready to make the climb. So as you know, classrooms are filled with students with many different needs and proficiency levels. And we hear all very often that we're asking teachers to plan to meet the needs of all of them. And that's on top of all the many different things we ask of teachers. And it really is just, it's too much. So I'm not going to ask you to plan for all the learners in your classroom. Instead, I'm going to ask you to plan for one diverse learner and then get really great at applying those learnings to the majority of your students. So during this training, we're really here focusing on level 2. We're saying, if we have students in class that have similar needs, such as a struggling reader, we're going to identify a proxy, the student, get great at serving them, then apply those learnings to the benefit of the majority of students in our classroom. So we're at level 2 planning for the benefit of level 1. So our approach here today is focal student strategy. It was developed by National Equity Project and really taken learnings from Zaretta Hammond. We've combined that with some other research and evidence-based practices around serving diverse learners. So what is it? So really looking at the diagram there, I'm just going to read through a little bit of it, but it says, once I learn how to accelerate the learning of these students, in the key skill areas, I can then use the learnings and approaches for the bigger groups of students. If I use my focal student and my knowledge of what helps them progress to inform a whole class planning, then that planning will now be personalized and will impact students who have similar challenges. So by focusing on focal students, teachers become more effective for all students. By setting specific goals for students and measuring progress toward those goals, could be on a daily, could be on a weekly basis, teachers gather concrete evidence about the effectiveness of their teaching and how to make adjustments to better serve their students. So we really believe it's not only important for teachers to examine focal students' academic needs, but also to talk about those students' affective emotional needs. Is knowing that really both the academics and sort of the social emotional learning is going to what really drives student growth. So does it work? Well, there is evidence that it does. There's a school in California, and the teachers there who accelerated 3 or more focal students by 1 to 2 levels on the California standards test also accelerated more students overall, while allowing fewer students to drop proficiency levels. So we know it can work if implemented well. So at the DLC, we've created 4 student profiles that are focal students. And we've actually created targeted supports for each of these 4 students. These are what we believe are 4 very common profiles of students who really present a challenge of teachers to plan to really meet their needs. Today, we're only going to talk about Daisha, but the premise being, if we could get great at planning for 4 students that meet these profiles, our tier 1 instruction is really going to accelerate learning for many more students in our classroom. So we're going to be talking about Daisha. So this is the full process of the focal student strategy. So starting with one student like Daisha, you plan lessons with her in mind over the course of 1 month or 3 weeks, over essentially a longer period of time than 1 week. You work this process many times, get great at a few tier 1 strategies before moving on to another focal student. So the steps in the process are, we've got our goal. What is our learning goal? Who is our student? Get to know them really well. What are specific barriers that student's going to have to meet the learning goal? What is a scaffold or strategy that I could implement to overcome that barrier? And finally, most importantly, we evaluate the success of this and repeat the process. So the first part is starting with the learning goal. I know a lot of us have spent time writing learning goals, so we just wanted to name 2 pieces. One is the goal aligned to the grade level standard, and then 2, is it really clear what their measures of success are? Could a stranger come in who's not familiar with this unit actually come in and visualize what success? Will they know when the student, if you will, passes the finish line? So really consider that as you're writing a learning goal. So Daisha goal in this case, we're talking about a 4th grade unit about ratifying the 19th Amendment. So she's actually going to have to independently read a text, answer questions in writing 2 to 3 sentences on cause and effect and how events are connected over time. So it's a really specific learning goal, one that one could measure. And I now know better sense of what are the challenges Daisha is going to have with that learning goal. I would add this learning goal to this planning template that we've given and you'll have access to. It's linked at the bottom of the presentation or end of the presentation. So now that we know the learning goal, you added that to your template. Now we got to know our traveler. So without reading these, what we would ask you to do and add this to the template is you'd go in and fill in 3 sort of sections about your student, not just what they struggle with, not just what their barriers, but just as important, what are their interests? What are their motivations? What are their strengths? You identify all of those, and then you're going to leverage those in your planning as well. So we know, survey the mountain, we know our traveler here. Now we identify the barriers. So when we know where we're heading and we know our student, we'll also begin to understand what might get in their way. So what we would do is say, okay, here's our learning goal. We now know about Daisha. What are the specific barriers she's going to face? Maybe one of them is around writing, and like, can she show us what she knows if writing is a real challenge for her? And we would take these very specific barriers with Daisha in mind, and the barriers being very specific to the learning goal. We add these to the template. Next, we assemble the tools. What equipment or supplies will we need to ensure that the students can make it all the way to the top? So here we're looking at scaffolds, which are in essence different kind of strategies. So scaffolds are temporary supports. Scaffolding does not help. So I want to clarify, they're temporary. They're really about building the student independence so that when we're not with them, they can do it on their own. And I think sometimes as educators, our emphasis is on helping them complete the assignment or helping them get a good grade. Slight change in focus, but a very important one is like, how am I as a teacher going to equip this student to do it on their own? So scaffolds are temporary. They're a bridge to rigorous content. They're tailored to the specific barrier and that student. And they're done first before the individual accommodations and modifications, because a lot of students who need that individualized support will benefit from these scaffolds. So emphasize again, I'm not asking you to plan an individualized support for every student in your class. We're saying let's plan for level 2 and then take those learnings and apply them to tier 1 for the benefit of the majority of students in your class. So if I'm sort of pulling this all together, I would have my lesson. This is a Eureka lesson. I'd have my planning template that I'm completing. And we'd have this learner profile that we've developed that has links to a lot of really strong scaffolds that you could choose which one makes sense for your learner and implement them. Choose the ones that we know work or that you know work, and implement those whenever you can going forward. So to identify which scaffolds, we've sort of created 3 buckets: engagement, representation, and action and expression. And so you would go through for each of those 3 buckets, identify again the specific barrier for each one. Again, max would say 1 scaffold in each area. Maybe you only do 2. Again, trying to get great at fewer things. So most important step is really the last step. It's where you go back, you're evaluating, and you're repeating. Did they meet the measure of success? How so? If yes, what scaffold would you prioritize for future lessons? And if not, what will you change for the next lesson? So quick pause for to reflect, because that's really the end of the process, is thinking through, did you identify a focal student that could serve as a proxy for other students with similar needs? And then were your scaffolds very tailored to the specific barriers the student may have to meeting that specific learning goal? So some questions to consider. To level up on this, to get really great at it, consider before you move to a new focal student, do multiple repetitions of it and get great at just a few scaffolds that you know really work and that you can pull out of your toolkit later on because you've gotten so good and proficient at them. Also recommend doing it alongside a strategy. Great to do it with a partner, both accountability and we just get better together. So what we've learned today, there's goal, then you get to know the student, identify the barrier, identify the scaffold specific, going to help the student overcome that barrier. You evaluate the impact and you repeat that process. To close out, here's a little humor. This cartoon or comic. You have a man who is clearing the stairs for students. And the student in the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And the man says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." And he says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." Clearing a path for everyone. And so we believe when we build a pathway for diverse learners, all students can come in. Thank you for being with us today. Hope you'll come back some more.